be considered as pending and brought up and read.
Without objection. The clerk will report.
The senator from Oklahoma, Mr. Coburn, proposes an amendment numbered 610 to amendment numbered 602.
I ask that unanimous consent that the amendment be considered as read.
Without objection.
Mr. President, the bill we have before us today is a bill to fund emergency relief through FEMA for a lot of the emergency disasters that our country has experienced over the past 6 months. And I don't think there's a large disagreement that we ought to take care of the areas that are the federal responsibility in the respective states for the extreme weather tragedies as well as fire-related tragedies that have been experienced by a multitude of states. The question, however, is given where we stand as a country, do we just borrow the money to do that and add it to the debt, or is the government running so efficient that we can't cut something else and make a choice about how we pay for it? And the bill is brought forward has no pay for at all. In other words, the assumption is if we pass this bill, we will go and borrow approximately $7 billion more in the international markets. And what I would put forward is that we know we have plenty of areas that we can cut now that are not effective, not efficient, that are wasteful, that are duplicative, and we would not have to borrow that additional money. The easiest thing in the world is to spend somebody else's money. And what we're doing with this bill by not paying for it is actually asking our grandchildren to pay for an obligation that we have today. And the amendment that I have considered, asked to be called up, is nearly identical to an amendment that this body passed by a vote of 64 to 36 in April of this year. The Government Accountability Office brought forth a report on duplication that showed hundreds of millions of dollars in wasteful duplication. And this isn't the only area where we could go, but this is an area that we've already as a body agreed to is an effective way to pay and save money. And so we could easily find $7 billion by eliminating multiple programs that accomplish the same thing. And so let me just give some examples of what the GAO showed. The Department of Defense and the VA are both creating new medical record systems as we speak, both paying for independent contractors doing the same thing. They're going to have intertwined medical records ultimately, and yet we don't need to set up two different programs. So by doing that, you could save a couple of $1 billion just by having one program for both VA and DOD. We have multiple contracts, according to the GAO, in terms of interagency and government area-wide contracts that actually increase our procurement costs, where we could consolidate those and have one contract and actually save money. But we haven't done that. That's something that can be done by the OMB at our direction. The other area, which is extremely interesting, and the President's already agreed to this, they're already starting to do it, but we could do it much faster and save a significant amount of money. We can save $150 to $200 billion over the next 10 years just by consolidating data centers. We initially had some 500 of those, and I think we're up to around 2,000. We had 432 in 1998 and 2,000 data centers, federal data centers, in 2010. And what everybody knows is we could cut that by about half, not have any change in the effectiveness, and save about $150 billion over the next 10 years. So what this amendment does, it identifies the areas listed in the GAO report and instructs the OMB to find those that are most likely to be achievable to come to $7 billion. We have agreed to do this in the past on a previous bill when Senator Warner and I offered this amendment jointly to pay for the spending. I can go on with a lot of other areas in terms of wasteful spending. I won't. But I would make this one plea. In August, we left here after passing a debt limit increase, the largest debt limit increase we've ever incurred in segments, and said we were going to start living within our means. We've created a super committee to find $1.5 trillion over the next 10 years in savings. And while they're doing that, if we decide to pass a emergency supplemental bill for FEMA and don't pay for it, we're going to be working exactly the opposite direction of what we said we needed to do. And so the facts is we're almost schizophrenic. We say we need to cut spending, and yet we're going to spend $7 billion more, but we don't want to find some spending to cut to pay for it. We just want to borrow it. And you can understand why very few Americans have confidence in us, because on the one hand, we're addressing the problem, on the other hand, we're ignoring the problem. And so I think it would behoove the confidence level in this institution if, in fact, we tried to pay and found the courage and the willpower to say, if we're going to spend additional money, we're going to create priorities, and we're actually going to eliminate spending somewhere else to be able to pay for this, to do this more important thing. I have trouble understanding, even when I talk to our colleagues privately, why we wouldn't do this. Why we wouldn't pay for this $7 billion by reducing wasteful spending elsewhere. And so as we go to the vote at 4 o'clock, the question that people ask is, why was it okay to cut the spending from these departments back in April, but it's not okay to cut the spending now? And 64 of our colleagues voted to cut this spending in April. And so, I know several are opposed to paying for this, but we're in a new day. We live in a new world. The Oklahoma Chamber of Commerce was up here this week, and the title of their meeting was New Realities. Well, the new reality is we're going to run to the end of the time at which we can borrow money or afford to pay the interest rate on the money that we can borrow. And the discipline that we need is to live within our means. And this is one step that, number one, will be the right thing to do for future generations. It's the right thing to do to build confidence in our institution. And it's the right thing to do to eliminate waste and duplication in the federal government. And with that, I'll yield back the floor and note the absence of quorum and make a point that I will talk again on this prior to the vote.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.